All right, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the delay. The page wasn't set up, so I had to go in and set that up real quick. Still had yesterday's office hours on there, so we'll wait a little bit to let everyone come in. All right. Give people a second here to come in here. Yeah, I forgot yesterday when office hours ended. I usually set up the next one, and I forgot that the website was not working yesterday after office hours, so I wasn't able to set it up. All right, but it looks like we got some questions in there to start with. All right, so we'll start here with Dan A. Dan A says, "Hey Q, I had a local coach have a look at my swing, and he commented that the takeaway was too shallow. How steep or shallow should my takeaway be? And could my swing being too shallow be the reason I'm having difficulty hitting the ground? Mostly having thin shots. By the way, I'm still working on the power turn, so my main swing thought is full shoulder turn beyond 90 degrees. Thanks." So your backswing can be whatever it needs to be. It only matters how the club's coming down the downswing. So if you have a coach tell you that your takeaway is too shallow, I would ask them that question. I'm not the one who told you that your backswing was too shallow. That was the coach. So I would have the coach may have a logical explanation as to why it is. Now, you could be, if you bring the club, oftentimes when we bring the club back really, really shallow in the backswing, it's not always the case, but oftentimes when we bring the club back really, really shallow, we'll tend to come down steep in the downswing. So it may kind of look like this, right? So this would be a very shallow backswing, can lead, and often does lead to a steep downswing, right? So if that is what's happening, right, then feeling like you're much steeper, like you're more standing the club up in the backswing and then shallowing it in the downswing may be a better place for you to go. But just because you're bringing it back shallow doesn't mean you're going to bring it down steep, right? You can bring it back shallow and then bring it down shallow, right? Raymond Floyd did that. Raymond Floyd, Sam Snead, they both bring it back shallow, right? And then they brought it down shallow. So it's not that your backswing is too shallow. It's more that what's your downswing doing? Because the ball doesn't care what you do in your backswing. It only cares about how you bring this club into it in the downswing, right? So, yeah. So if an instructor ever tells you, you get somebody to look at your swing and they tell you, hey, your backswing's too shallow, ask questions. Ask them, okay, why? Why is it too shallow? What do I need to do? Right? Unfortunately, it's out of context for me because I don't know why that instructor told you it was too shallow. It could be great advice. It could be the instructor doesn't know what he's talking about or she's talking about, right? It could be either or. I don't know, right? So that's kind of what you have to look at. There's no too steep or too shallow backswing. It's all about how you are managing this club in the downswing. So you can bring like a Matt Wolf. Matt Wolf brings the club way out here and shallows it out. Tiger Woods brings the club basically right up in line with his hands and then shallows it out in the downswing, right? Raymond Floyd brings it in way inside and then brings it down shallow. All of those players, every single one of them got that club to shallow out in the downswing. Every single one of them. But they both had very, very different backswings. Or they all have very different backswings, very different takeaways. Matt Wolf is like this. Raymond Floyd is like this, right? Two very, couldn't be farther from different. But I bet you they look very, very similar at this point in the swing, right? Almost every single tour player that you're going to see is you're going to see at this club parallel to the ground position. Almost every single one of them, you're going to see a few things. You're typically going to see hands in front of the trail thigh area when the club's parallel to the ground. You're going to see weight forward, right? So you're going to see more weight on the lead foot. You're going to see the hands in front of the trail thigh when you're looking, or close to the trail thigh when you're looking from that face-on position. A lot of times, amateurs, they're like this, right? Or they're kind of hanging back and they're like this, recreational golfers. Then from the down line view, what you're typically going to see is the hips are slightly open, right? To this club parallel position, they're slightly open to the ball. This club, you're typically going to see it a little bit from the inside. So a little bit inside the hands, right? And you're going to see this club face angled down angled down toward the ground slightly, right? Some amount. It's usually going to be a little bit or a lot. Some players are here, some players are there. What I see with a lot of recreational golfers is I see the hips are basically square or even still closed off at this point. I'm going to see the club. A lot of times I see the club out here, and a lot of times I see the face is open, right? It's usually one of those or all of those things, right? So that's really where I would strive to get to. Now, if your backswing is putting you in a position that makes that very difficult, then it could be what you want to do. As I mentioned earlier, if you bring it way inside, sometimes, and oftentimes it does, it will lead, the hands coming in and the club being shallow in the backswing can tend to lead to the hands, because just the natural momentum of the club just wants to work in that direction. But it doesn't mean that it will, right? So focus on what's happening as the club comes down to the ball. That's what I would focus on. And if your backswing affects that, then that's great. But unfortunately, there's no way for me to know without seeing your swing if that is the case. All right, let's keep going. TJ says, Q, can you go over the downswing drill of pulling an arrow out of the quiver? I'm confused how this helps the motion of the right arm into impact. The intention of this, pulling the club out of the quiver, is to get you the feeling of your hands kind of going out away from you to start the downswing, right? So a lot of times, this would be a great drill for someone who kind of pulls their arms in when they start the downswing and cast the club, right? So what we want to understand is that the club, the mass of the club head, the weight of the club head, it wants to follow in the direction that your hands are moving, right? So if I have the club like this, and then I start pulling it in that direction, the club head is going to want to line up with that, right? So if I'm here and then I pull my hands in, right, that club head is going to want to go that way. If I'm here and I feel my hands going out away from me, right, then that club is going to want to lag in the downswing. That's what that drill is intended for. It's not intended to, if you're looking for something to get the motion of the right arm into impact correct, that's not what that drill is intended for. That drill is intended to get the hands working away, right? To not pull the hands in, right? So if you find yourself pulling your hands in to start the downswing, you're casting the club to start the downswing like this, then that quiver drill is a really good one for you. So this is going to help you to feel, right? Because it's like I'm pulling an arrow out of the quiver, right? That drill is not intended for your right arm. You may move your right arm better into impact by doing that drill, right? Because if I'm doing this, my right arm is most likely, not going to work into impact very well. Typically, if I'm going like this, I'm going to straighten out my arm to try to compensate for that. Whereas if I'm out here, right, if my hands are going out away from me, and that club's lagging, my right arm's typically going to work a little bit better. But it's not a drill that's specifically intended to make the right arm. That might be a byproduct of doing the drill, but it's not a drill specifically to get your right arm to work better into impact. It's specifically intended to get your hands and your arms working better in the start of the downswing if you are someone that pulls your hands in and throws the club out and start. So Paul C says, how can I engage my lower body more? My hips are square at impact. That's a good question. So essentially, typically what I see with golfers is it's not that they don't want to use or that they're not able to use their lower body or they're not trying to engage their lower body. Is that they don't have any incentive to do so, right? So there's two main reasons for this. The two main reasons that I see people that come into impact with their hips square. Number one is coming down steep, right? So if I'm coming down steep, right? So that would be, I'm coming down like this. This club is more in a steep position. So this would be shallow, right? And then this would be steep. So you think of it as, this isn't like a foolproof way to think about it necessarily, but this is a fairly cut and dry way to think about it, right? So if I'm coming down and my club, butt end of my club as I'm coming down is pointing inside the golf ball, that's going to be steep. If I'm coming down and that butt end of the club is pointing outside the golf ball, roughly when my hands reach or my lead arm reaches about parallel to the ground, if it's pointing outside the golf ball, that's going to be a fairly shallow position, right? So if my hands or if my butt end of my club is pointing down, right, then I'm going to need to make some sort of move in my swing to get that club to shallow. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to come down steep and I'm going to come over the top, right? So if I'm here and I keep rotating my body, look at what happens to that club. That club comes way over the top. Now my lower body is very engaged, but now I'm coming over the top. That's going to lead to poor shots. I'm going to hit pulls. I'm going to hit slices, pull hooks, and that's if I'm able to make good contact with the ball. Most likely, I'm not going to make good contact with the ball. I'm going to have trouble hitting it in the center of the face. I'm going to have trouble hitting the ground in a good place, right? So what people will tend to do is when they're coming down steep is they'll try to reroute the club by early extending my hips. So if I kind of straighten out my legs and straighten out my body, you can see how that gets the club to now work from the inside, but I'm not able to engage my lower body, or you're engaging your lower body, but you're early extending to do that. So you're definitely using your lower body when you early extend. You're just not doing it the way we see the best players do it, right? And it's because you have no incentive to do so. If you were to use your legs like we see the pros, you would come way over the top and you would not hit functional golf shots, right? This is a solution to hit a functional golf shot. To, if you're starting down steep, to thrust the hips forward. Now I got the club shallowed out. Now I can swing from the inside. Now the problem with it is that I'm going to early release the club because I'm moving my body away from the ball. I'm going to have to early extend my arms, right? Or fully extend my arms. I'm going to release the club early, and that's going to lead to loss of loft or added loft, excuse me. Thin shots, chunks, it can lead to issues. But I would much rather have the person that does that than to have the person that it really engages their lower body as far as rotation is concerned and comes out over the top. I'll tell you, every single day of the week, I'd rather have the guy or gal that gets that club working at least functionally down to the ball. So the solution to that would be, okay, now I need to get that club shallowed out. Now, if I were to make that same move, imagine I have this club shallowed out and then I were to early extend. Well, look, my club is just way too far from the inside at this point. I wouldn't hit good golf shots. So now I'm actually incentivized when I have this club shallowed out to stay in my posture and rotate into the ball, right? So that's number one. Number two reason why people tend to not engage their lower body is to get the club face square, right? So if the face is open coming down, we will tend to make some sort of compensation, whatever it may be, some sort of move to get the club face square at impact, right? So if I stall my body, then I can release my hands to square it up. What we want to understand is that releasing the club, right? So if I'm doing that, right, that gets the club face closed. If I have lag on the club, that opens the club face, right? So this is a big reason why people have trouble having lag on the club at impact is because they're releasing the club to square it up. Because if they actually did have lag, they would hit the ball way to the right because the club face would just be wide open, right? So if my club face is open and I stall my hips, then I can release it and square it up. If my club face is open and then I rotate and I get my hands in front, that club face is just going to stay open, right? So that would be another big reason. If I'm coming down and this space is open and my solution to close it is going to be to stall my body so I can release my hands. If I want to have this, if I want to be able to get my hands in front, I need to have that club face more closed. So that way, when I come down to the ball, my hands can be in front and that face is going to be square and I can have the hands in front and have some good shaffling there. So those are the two main reasons. So number one, coming down steep, we stand up to shallow it up. Number two, the club face is open. We stall the body. We don't keep rotating. So that way I can release the club earlier to square up the face, right? Those are the two reasons, the two number one and number two reasons why people don't engage their lower body, or they don't engage their lower body in the way that we see pros do it. So we do have a course that addresses both of these things. The 20-minute shallowing fix addresses both of these things. The first thing we have to do is we got to get the club face more closed. The way you do that is through a stronger grip and through your wrist angles. Those are the two best ways to do it, right? So that's in drill number one. Clay talks about how to find a stronger grip, and he also talks about, bowing the lead wrist, getting stronger wrist angles, right? So that's number one. Number two, once we get the club face shallowed out, once we get the club face closed, now we can work on getting the club shallowed out. That's what drill number two is, right? And then in drill number three, you work on dialing that in. So if you're having trouble engaging the lower body, you won't really have much luck directly working on engaging the lower body, because if you actually did that, if you actually engaged the lower body correctly, it would lead to very poor shots. Then you're like, what the heck? I'm trying to do what I should be doing, which is engage my lower body. That's what all the best players do. But when I do that, I hit terrible golf shots. Well, it's because you have no reason to engage the lower body. You have to give your body a reason, your lower body a reason to get engaged and to rotate. And the way you do that is by shallowing out the club and having the face more closed. So that way you can keep more lag on it and things like that. So if I was having trouble engaging my lower body, the first thing that I would do is I'd work through the 20-minute shallowing fix. So to get to that course, I'd click the instruction tab, then click the 20-minute shallowing fix, and start working through those drills. All right, let's keep going. So James V says, I am only a year into this wonderful game at 61. I'm unclear if I should use the natural grip I was taught in the 20-minute shallowing fix for the lessons I started in chipping and pitching. Excuse me. You certainly can. You can use a strong grip. You can use a weak grip for chipping and pitching. It's certainly fine. Or you can use a different grip. You just got to find what works best for you. Personally, I like to use a weaker grip for chipping and pitching, unless I'm trying to drive in something low. But generally, I'm going to use a weaker grip. The reason why is because I like to have the shaft a little bit more straight up and down for these shots. And to have a very strong grip and to have the shaft straight up and down is very, very uncomfortable. So, but it may be different for you. So I like to have a weaker grip, and I like to keep a little bit more loft on the face. That's kind of the difference between like a chip shot. Now a pitch shot, depending on how far you go out. So basically, when I'm taking more, I would say more than like a 30-yard shot, 30-yard pitch shot, I go back to my old grip because I'm trying to get more shaft lean with those and drive it in there, because there's enough speed there that I'm going to be able to get spin on the ball. But from inside, sorry, I got to sneeze. Excuse me. Excuse me. So when you get inside of 30 yards, there's typically not enough speed there unless you're super highly skilled and know how to put spin on the ball with from short distances. It takes a really high amount of skill. 1 year into golf, you probably don't have that skill yet. So But generally, inside of 30 yards, there's just not going to be enough speed there to be able to create spin, right? So we don't want to be driving the ball in low. We want to have loft on the club to be able to create that spin and come in softer. So personally, for me, for those yardages, I'll use usually a weaker grip, right? And I won't have as much shaftling. Still want some shaftling, but I won't have as much shaftling. But then when I get out of that 30 yards, I'm typically going back to my stronger grip and bringing it in low because I'm going to have some speed there to be able to create the spin. So there's no, I wish I could give you a definitive answer, but I would just play around with it and see what works best for you. You may find that you chip better with a weaker grip, or you may find better that you chip better with a stronger grip. So I just play around with it. You can use a stronger grip, but for me personally, I use a weaker grip for the chipping and pitching from close range. So Roy M says, I've been away from golf for 20 years, so all the equipment since I quit is new to me. The older model of the cheaper, the older the model, the cheaper it can be purchased. So having said that, what is the best driver for high handicap golfers during that time frame? I mean, they haven't made any crazy advances in the drivers. I would say in the last, it's been a little while. I would say if you can get yourself a Ping G400, or I think it's G400. The 400 model is that one, the 400 Max. That one is a very high for giving. It's a high MOI driver. That one, I remember when we were meeting with Ping, they were talking about that one. They were able to make a huge difference between. There was a much bigger gap between the previous model and that one. Now, there's been a Ping 410, 425, and 430 since then, and I don't know that they've made huge advances. Like, the thing about Ping is that they won't release a new club unless it's better than the previous one, right? So other golf companies don't have that. I know. I think there's definitely companies that release drivers that aren't as good as the ones that they had up before. It's just a new scheme or whatever it might be. So yeah, I would say my recommendation would be a Ping G400 Max, because it's that one I know is very high MOI, and you're most likely going to find it for pretty cheap. You could probably find a G410 for pretty cheap as well. I mean, that driver's probably 6 years old, 5 years old. I mean, I don't know exactly how much. The Ping G400 is probably that one's probably 7 or 8 years old, right? So you could probably find that like used online or something like that for fairly cheap. So that's what I would recommend if you were looking for something. But I'm not an expert on the clubs. I'm just be honest. I don't get into the clubs that much. I'm more about the carpenter than the tools, if that makes sense. I'm about making the skills of the carpenter better, not the tools. So that's kind of my philosophy. But I agree. We were talking 20 years ago. I'm in college at this time. So what was I playing in college? I had the I had a Titleist something. I can't remember. 975F, I think it was, and that one was the best at the time. And I would say, I know I wouldn't hit that as good now as I do, the Ping G400. So it's a much bigger. I don't think that even that 975F was even a 460 yet. So what I definitely recommend doing is make sure you get I believe 460 is the highest, or maybe it's 360 cc's, cubic centimeters. That's the head. That makes a big difference in the forgiveness of the club. So I make sure that you're getting the biggest head that you can get, which I believe is 460 cc's. And then high MOI would be what you'd be looking for as far as, forgiveness is concerned, because that's what MOI is the resistance to twisting, right? So when we don't hit it in the center of the face, which if you're a high handicap golfer, you're probably not hitting it dead center all the time, right? You're having some off center strikes. So how that helps is when you hit it off center, the face will twist, right? So if you have a high MOI driver, the face is more resistant to twisting, which means you'll be able to transfer more energy to the golf ball, right? And you won't lose as much distance if you have high MOI. So my recommendation would be the Ping G400, or you could probably even find a 410 because that's pretty old as well. All right. So no new questions yet. So keep the questions coming. We got about 30 minutes left here. Sorry, my nose is itchy today. If you're just hopping on here, I'm just waiting for a question to be asked. So if you got one, feel free to ask. All right. Sounds like we got one. So Charles H says, "What clubhead speed should we strive for with iron?" So your clubhead speed is going to vary based on the club because the length of the club changes, right? And even if you're using single length clubs, typically the clubhead speed will change from club to club because they have to weight the clubs differently. So that way there's not huge gapping between the clubs. So a lot of times the shorter clubs, I believe, will be longer, or excuse me, will be heavier, and then the lower lofted clubs will be lighter and the higher lofted clubs will be heavier. But with irons, you're typically with an adjustable set, right? Or with a variable length set, which is pretty much standard. I would say that's what 99.9% of golfers have. Their club head speed is going to vary. So for a driver, the average golfer is about 95 miles per hour. The average male recreational golfer is going to be at about 95 miles per hour. And then it's going to go down slightly as you go down through the bag, right? So an amateur, might swing their 7-iron like 8. The average recreational golfer might swing their 7-iron 80 miles per hour, right? So it's going to vary. And your 5-iron might be, 83, 84 miles an hour if you're around that average mark. So so what I would do is if you want to kind of see where you're at as far as club head speed is concerned, 95, I would say, is the benchmark for an average male, right? Now, that's average across all age groups. So obviously, if you're 20, it'd be nice if you be a little bit more than that. And if you're, 60, a little bit below that is going to be fine. Because typically when you're older, you're going to be playing shorter tees and things like that. So I would say it's going to be slightly less as you go down through the bag. But I would use the driver as a benchmark, and then the irons are just going to be slightly less as you go down through the bag. So John R. says, how do you approach trying to fade and draw the ball? Also, when playing, do you try to work the ball based on the fairway slope, or do you just single shape primarily? So there are different ways to do this. So let's answer the first question first. How do you approach trying to fade and draw the ball? So first, what we have to understand is what creates a fade and what creates a draw, right? So in order to hit a fade, the club path needs to be out to in, left of the target, right? So if I put an alignment stick down, let's say that is pointed directly at my target. That means that my club path needs to work outside that stick to inside the stick through impact, out to in. I need to have my club face open to that path, but closed to the target, right? Because I need this ball to start to the left of the target and fade back toward the target, right? So if my face is also open to the target, then my ball is going to start to the right of the target, and that's going to fade away from the target, which is not what I want. If I want the ball to curve onto the target, I need the ball to start to the left with the fade if I'm right-handed. And in order to do that, I need to have the club face close to the target, but open to the path to get the curve, right? So if you want to put numbers on it, we could say my club path is 4 degrees out to in, right? That's the direction my club head is moving through impact. It's 4 degrees to the left. And then my club face would be 2 degrees to the left. That makes it 2 degrees close to my target so the ball can start to the left, and 2 degrees open to my path so that way the ball can curve to the right back toward the target. For a draw, it's the opposite. I need to have my club path working from inside the target line to outside the target line through impact. I need to have my face open to the target but close to my path. If we want to put numbers on it, we could say, okay, I want my club path to be 4 degrees into out. If I want a ball to curve, to draw back onto the target with a club path that's 4 degrees into out, I need to have my club face 2 degrees open at impact. That makes it 2 degrees open to my target, but 2 degrees closed to my path. That's going to produce a draw that starts to the right and curves to the left, right? So once we understand what actually creates the ball flight, then we can adjust accordingly. Now, me personally, I naturally have an inside swing path. So I set up with my feet square to hit a draw, and I swing from the inside, right? I have a naturally inside swing path with my feet square. So I swing from the right, and then I have my club face a little bit closed. It produces a draw. When I want to hit a fade, I swing my club down the same way relative to my body, but I'm going to now adjust my body to the left in order to get that path to be out to in. Now, relative to my body, it's still from the inside. I'm still shallowing out the club, but relative to my target line, I'm coming down out to in. My path is going to be out to in. Now, to get the face open, I take depending on how much I want to fade it, but to get the face open, typically what I'll do is I'll kind of hold the face open, right? So instead of for my natural ball flight, right, which is a path from the inside, I'll let my hands naturally kind of turn over. That gets the face close to my path, to produce the draw. But if I do that from here, or if I do that same thing from here, I'm going to hit a pull draw because my ball is going to start to the left and then it's going to it's going to continue to curve to the left. So I need my face to be open to my path. So instead of rolling my hands over, I'm going to feel like I hold that face open a little bit as I'm coming through, and that will produce that little fade. Now, if I'm really trying to put some curve on it, I'll typically weaken my grip as well to help me keep the face open. But generally, I'm just going to be kind of holding off that face as I come through to keep it from rolling over and keeping it open so that way that ball can fade. That's how I approach it. But you may not have a draw as a natural shot shape, right? Maybe a fade is your natural shot shape. Maybe when you set up square, you naturally kind of come down out to in with an open face. Well, in order for you to draw the ball, what you may need to do is you may need to aim your body way to the right and get this club face more closed by either strengthening the grip or trying to turn that face over more through contact to get it to draw. So how you approach it and how I approach it may be two different things. What I would try to work toward is having a nice shallow downswing. That's what all the best players do. All the best players are shallowing out the club. All the best players are basically hitting fades in the way that I just talked about. Dustin Johnson hits primarily fades, right? Almost every shot that he hits is a fade. That kind of lends into the next question. Should you be playing one shot shape or one shot shape primarily, or should you mix it up? I think for most golfers, it's probably best to have one shot shape that's kind of your go-to. So for me, that's a draw. I draw almost all of my shots. So that's the way that I go through. I will fade the shot from time to time, but I generally hit, I would say, 90 to 95% draws out on the course. I think that's, in my opinion, I think that's probably the better way to go. But there are awesome players, great ball strikers that do both, right? So one example would be Tiger. Tiger works the ball both ways. He hits draws, he hits fades. Rory is another one. It will work the ball both ways. So there are high-level players that work the ball both ways. I dabbled in that. You just kind of have to find what works best for you. I dabbled in that a little bit, but I find that I play more consistently when I'm doing one shot shape most of the time. Now, if you are someone who is going to work the ball one way, that doesn't mean that that's all you ever try to hit, right? In your practice, you should be trying to, let's say, so for me, if I'm working on my game and I'm working on shaping shots, I'm going to be hitting both draws and fades. Even though on the course, I'm going to hit mostly draws because that's what I'm most comfortable with. But if I only practice draws, what ends up happening with that is my draw turns into an overdraw, right? And then it turns into a two-way miss where I get the block and the hook, right? And then hopefully, most of the time, hopefully it's somewhere in between. But if I only practice draws, a lot of times your path can get too much from the inside, your face can get too close, and then you're going back and forth between open face and closed face, and you end up having a hard time controlling your ball flight quite as well. So when you practice draws and fades, even though you may primarily like one of those, you never get too far away from where neutral is. And that's where you want. What you really want is fairly close to neutral. When I name like Dustin Johnson, for example, sure, he hits fades all the time. That's what his shot shape is. But if all of us have watched the shot tracers on TV, right? And we watch the ball flight. We watch Dustin Johnson hit a driver, and we know that he hits fades, but if you watch the ball flight, it really looks pretty straight. To the naked eye, it looks pretty straight. In reality, it's kind of going up and then just falling to the right a little bit. That's what he's calling a fade. Most of what we would call a fade, Dustin Johnson would probably call a slice, right? The high-level players would call a slice. So even though they're hitting a shot shape, they're typically hitting, it's very, very close to straight. They're only getting a few degrees away from zero. They're not hitting big, heavy draws. Now, there might be some instances where they try to really bend one, right? But generally, they're hitting it pretty straight. So now, instances on the course when I would hit a fade would be, let's say I'm on a par 3 and I have a strong right to left wind, right? Let's say it's really windy that day. It's 20, 30 mile an hour winds, right? And it's right to left. Well, if I hit a draw with a right to left heavy wind, that's going to be a hook. It's going to be a very, very big hook. So in that situation, I would probably try to fade it against the wind to keep it from curving too much, right? That would maybe be a situation where I would hit a fade. Another situation would be maybe the ball is very much below my feet. If the ball is very much below my feet, you're going to tend to have the face more open at contact because the club gets more upright. When the club's more upright, the face gets more open. You're going to tend to fade it more. So in that situation, I'm going to tend, I'm probably going to take like a draw swing, but because of the situation, right, it's going to typically end up fading, right, because the club's getting more upright. Those would be like a couple of situations. Excuse me. Another situation might be where I have something kind of in my way, right? If I hit a draw, I might be getting too close to the trees on the right or something like that. And if I hit a fade, I can more comfortably hit the shot, right? So those would be like a few situations where I personally would do that. But you can go out there and experiment with hitting both. You can go out there and experiment with working the ball both ways. So if you're going to do that, here would be some situations where you would maybe hit a draw instead of a fade. So if the pin is on the left, right? If the pin is on the left, I probably hit a draw. I would basically aim toward the right side of the green and let it draw toward the middle, and then let it feed a little bit more toward the hole. For a right pin for a right-handed golfer, I'd probably fade it because it's going to allow it to kind of you can aim a little bit left side of the green. You can fade it toward the middle and then let it kick toward the hole. For front pins, you may want to use a fade because fades tend to spin more, and you can get the ball to stick a little bit better if you hit a fade. That's oftentimes why tour players would do that. The wind plays a difference. I talked earlier, right? If you have a right to left wind and you're right-handed and you hit a draw, I would expect it to draw more. So if you don't want it to have a bunch of draw on it, I probably hit a fade against it to keep it straighter. And you do it on the opposite. If you have a strong left or right wind, right, I probably would hit a draw into that wind to keep it from curving too much, right? So those would often be some situations off the tee, drawing and fading, right? Let's say you have water on the left-hand side, right? You have OB on the left. You have trouble on the left, but the right is fairly open. I'd probably hit a draw in that situation, and so that way I could start my ball away from the trouble, right? I wouldn't really recommend hitting a fade in that situation because then you have to start the ball toward the trouble. Now it will curve away from it, but you want to start the ball away from the trouble and let it draw back, right? That would be, or let it curve back. If I had trouble on the right, I'd probably hit a fade. I would start the ball away from the trouble and let it come back a little bit, right? I know that may seem counterintuitive, but if you think about it in the sense of, okay, I don't want to start the ball at the trouble, then it makes a lot more sense. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. In my opinion, generally, I think most golfers, especially recreational golfers, are going to benefit more from hitting mostly one shot shape on the course, having a go-to shot shape that they're most comfortable with, and then only hitting different shots in situations that it's called for. That's my opinion, but there's definitely some varying opinions on that for sure. All right, let's keep it going. Sorry, give me a second here. I got a little refrigerator here in my office, and sometimes it just starts buzzing like crazy. I don't know if you can hear that through the mic, but sometimes it can get kind of loud. All right, let's keep going. So Mark says, hi, Q. Can you please review how the weight shifts, right foot, left foot, heel toe during the swing? Many thanks. Yeah, so let's put this down. Put this back out of the way. All right, so let's talk about this. So to start the swing, and this is something very common issue that I see, what we want to do is we want to start the swing by having a shift to the right. So typically when you look at most players, you're going to see the hips move slightly to the right to start the backswing. So as the club's going back, you'll typically see a little bit of a push into that right foot. And that's a little bit of a shift of the hips that way. And it's not usually a lot. You know, Henrik Stenson, he moves quite a bit. But most players, if you look at Rory, I mean, it's like an inch to a half an inch that he moves. And he's only doing that to put pressure into that trail foot early, right? So I'm going to put pressure in that trail foot, right? And I'll talk about from heel to toe here in a second, but I just want to talk about laterally from face on here first, right? So I'm going to be shifting into the trail foot. And then as I get here, this is really as far to my trail side as I'm going to be in the swing, as far as pressure is concerned. Right? So boom, that's as far, about halfway up. That's as much pressure as I'm going to have in my trail foot. I might have 75, 80% pressure in my trail foot at this point. From here to the top of the swing, I'm actually starting to move some pressure into my lead foot. Right? So you can think of, I'm pretty close to 50-50 at address. I'm going to shift into my trail side. I'm going to be about 75, 80% pressure on my trail side here. As I get up to the top, I'm starting to move pressure into my lead side, and you're actually going to see my hips moving toward the target a little bit, right? So if you were to draw a line on the outside of my hip here, I would bump into that line to start the swing, and then as I get up to the top, I'm going to start to create some separation between my hips in that line. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is because as my hips turn, they're going to become narrower looking from this perspective. The other reason is because I'm moving my hips laterally in that direction, right? So I'm going up here. I'm going to be about, as I get up to the top, as I'm getting up to the top, I'm going to be about 50-50 again at the top. But my pressure, as far as thinking about momentum, my pressure is moving in this direction. I'm moving in this direction. So I'm moving to the right to this point, and then from here all the way to impact and into the finish, I'm moving to the left. Right? So now I'm moving to the left. I'm starting my downswing, right? And that pressure is increasing into my lead foot. When I come to impact, I'm going to have about 75, 80% pressure in my lead foot, right? And then when I come all the way through into the full finish, I'm going to have, about 90% pressure in my lead foot. Really, the only pressure that's going into my trail foot is just the weight of my leg from, pushing through my toes, my big toe there. That's it. I should be, when I come around to the full finish, I want to be able to feel like I can just tap my toe and be in perfect balance, right? So that's the pressure shift throughout the swing, 50-50, 75-80 right, 50-50, 75-80 left, and then 90% in the full finish, right? Now, if we want to talk from heel to toe, at address, we're typically going to be in the middle of our feet to the balls of our feet, somewhere in there. I don't want you way out on your toes, and I don't want you way out in your heels either. Typically, that means you're going to have your backside too far out, pushed over your heels. We want to be fairly balanced with our hips on top of our ankles here at address. That's going to put our pressure pretty even through the feet, or maybe slightly toward the balls of the feet. As I start my swing, I'm going to push into the balls of my feet, and then that's going to gradually move into the heel of my trail foot as I get up to the top. Now, on the other side of that, the ball, I'm going to start putting more pressure into the balls of my feet on my left foot. So right foot, I'm going to go heel. Left foot, I'm going to be going balls of the feet, right, as I get to the top. Now, as I'm shifting into the lead side, that's shifting into the balls of my feet. And then as I'm coming down into impact, it's doing the opposite. I'm going to be driving more into the heel of my left foot, but my right foot, my heel's actually going to start coming off the ground. I'm going to be more on the balls of my feet as I come into impact, right? And then when I come through into the full finish, again, I'm driving mostly in my heel here and kind of the outside of my foot, and I'm only putting pressure in my toes here in the full finish. So Victoria says, hi, Q, please discuss the difference between the setup using a 3 hybrid versus 3 wood. Well, if you're hitting the shot off of the ground, no difference. Zero difference if you're hitting the shot off of the ground. Set it up the exact same way. No reason to change. As far as setup is concerned, typically with either one of these clubs, I like to see the ball position a little bit forward of the middle of the stance. And that may surprise you with the 3 wood, but that is one of the biggest reasons why I see people struggle to hit their 3 wood is because they play the ball off the inside of their lead foot. When we hit a ball off of the ground, we have to have a descending blow of the club down the ball. The club needs to be working down into the ball. If it isn't, you're going to have trouble with contact because unless you have a lie where the ball is sitting up perfectly, like it's on a tee, like you have some cushion underneath the ball that allows the club to work up into the ball. But usually we don't have that, right? Usually if you're hitting your 3 wood off the ground, you're going to be hitting it off the fairway, and it's going to be like a fairly tight lie or something like that kind of situation. You need to be hitting down on these shots, right? So in order to hit down on the shot, we have to have that ball position in a place that's going to make it a lot easier to do that, right? So we want to put that ball position a little bit forward to the middle of the stance. So if I put this alignment stick down, and this is the dead middle of my stance here, that would be where I would play like a 6 iron or a 7 iron. Pretty much any shot that you hit off the turf, you could play it from this position. A 3 wood, you could play it just a little bit forward of that, but you can see how that's not like this would be off the inside of my foot, and that's where I see a lot of people playing the 3 wood. If you do that, you're going to tend to hit up on the ball. The ground's in the way, right? So when you play the ball forward in your stance, if you miss the ground, you're going to thin it or you're going to top it. Oftentimes I see tops, right? If you hit the ground, you're going to chunk it, right? Whereas if I put it here, well, now that's just a little bit forward of the middle of my stance here. Now I can actually have a downward angle into the ball. That's going to allow me to make ball and turf contact at the same time, right? And I'm going to be able to hit it much more clean when I do that. So do the same thing off the ground with your 3 wood or your hybrid. When we're hitting the ball off of a tee, you have options with the 3 wood. The hybrid, you would hit it the exact same way. What I would do is I would just tee it up to give yourself what would feel like a perfect lie in the fairway. Just tee it up a little, get it off the ground just a little bit fluffed up, like you got like a little fluffy lie in the fairway where you got a little cushion underneath the ball. That's essentially what you're trying to do when you tee the ball up on the teeing ground. Just tee it up slightly, so that way it's much easier to hit when you do that, right? And you would hit it just like you would out of a really easy lie out of the fairway. The 3 wood, you can do the exact same thing, right? But you have options with the 3 wood. You can tee it up a little bit more forward and a little bit higher. So let's say this would be like if I'm teeing it up like I was hitting it out of the fairway, right? Just like I would with my hybrid, I can hit my 3 wood just like this. But if I want to hit it a little bit farther, right? What I can do is I can tee it up a little bit higher and put it a little bit more forward in the stance. Now we don't want to tee it up really high. Generally, we only want to tee it up to where about half of the ball is above the crown of the club. If we get it teed up too high with a 3 wood, you're running the risk of kind of swinging underneath it too much, hitting a pop-up, hitting a sky ball, right? So we don't want to tee it up super high. We just want to tee it up high enough to where this club can work down and then back up into the ball. There's a little bit of a space for that club to work up into the ball. This would be similar to the way you would hit your driver, right? The driver, we want to hit up on the ball a little bit. That's going to allow you to get a higher launch, lower spinning drive that's going to go farther. For a 3-wood, we want to do the same thing. We want to have higher launch, lower spinning shot if we want to hit it farther. If we're looking to hit it the same distance that we do out of the fairway, hit it like you would out of the fairway, just tee it up slightly. But if you're trying to get a little bit extra, then I would tee it up a little bit more forward. Not quite as forward as the driver because, again, we can't hit up on this as much as we do with the driver. It's very risky to do that. You certainly could, but it's pretty risky to do that because, again, you're running the risk. You need to tee it up quite, pretty close to as high, and you're running the risk of swinging underneath the ball, hitting a sky ball, which we don't want to do, right? So just a little bit forward than you would normally to allow that club to come in more level or a little bit up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to imagine like we're driving a nail up into that ball, and we're going to take a similar swing like we would with the driver. We're going to let that club bottom out and then hit up slightly up into that ball. That's going to allow you to get a higher launch, lower spin with the 3-wood. But generally, you're going to be hitting them really the exact same, with the exception of if you're trying to bust one down there a little bit more with the 3-wood, you could hit it a little bit closer to the same way you would with the driver, teed up a little bit higher, a little bit forward, hit up on it to get a higher launch, lower spin. All right. Let's see here. So I'll stay on here a few more minutes because I know we got started a little bit late because it wasn't set up correctly. So if we got any more questions, great explanation on the fade and draw. Thanks, and have a good weekend. No problem, John. Glad to help. So Jan asks, how can I improve my sequencing? So the way that we want to improve our sequencing is to do it from the ground up, right? So I talked a little bit about weight shift earlier, but just to review that, right? I want to have a shift into my trail side, and I want that to be early. And then I want to be shifting into my lead side as I get up to the top. And then I want to continue to push into my lead side as I come all the way around to a full finish, where I basically end up with almost all of my pressure weight in my lead foot at impact. So we want to understand is that the ground is the driver of proper sequencing. That's what dictates proper sequencing. If we're pushing into the ground correctly, then your sequencing is going to tend to get better. So that's where I would start to work on your sequencing. So a really great drill to work on this proper ground force to be able to push into the ground the correct way would be the step drill. So what we do in the step drill, and this is something that we do in the 20-minute distance fix, because not only, sequencing is really important, not only for consistency, but really for speed. If we're not sequencing correctly, it's like an engine. If an engine's not sequencing correctly, right, it's not going to, you're not going to get as much speed, right? If you want to have some speed, you want your engine to sequence correctly. So that's why, in the 20-minute distance fix, that's why we work on this in there. Sorry, I had a bug in my face. So what we want to do for this step drill is we're going to start out with our feet together, right? So feet are together. And what I like to do with this drill is I like to actually point the club in front to start. Now, we're not hitting a ball doing this drill. We're just focusing on pushing into the ground with the right at the right time to get our body moving the correct way, right? So no ball, start with the club in front. Actually, I'll move this ball out of the way so there's no confusion here. Start with the club in front. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to swing this club back, right? So I'm going to add pressure to my trail foot, and I want to swing this club back, right? Before we get into that, what I also want to mention is a key thing to understand with sequencing is that we have to put force into the ground ahead of the motion that we want to create, right? So in order for this club to swing back that way, I need to put force in the ground ahead of that. That's going to be with my right foot, right? Now, in the downswing, if I want the club to go that way, I need to put force in the ground ahead of that. That's going to be with my left foot, right? What I find that people who don't sequence properly tend to start this club coming down before they have force in the ground ahead of it. So basically what's happening is they're still on their back foot when they start the downswing. We need to get pressure into that lead foot to start the downswing. And that's what this drill really helps you to do. All right. So feet close together, start with the club in front, pressure into the trail foot, force going into the ground ahead of the movement of the club. I'm going to start swinging it back. As my hands clear my legs, clear my hips here, that's when I want to start my step forward, right? So I'm going to start my step forward. And as I get up to the top, I want to land. Now I'm putting pressure into the ground ahead of the motion of the club. Then I'm going to push into the ground and come all the way around into a full finish, right? So again, feet close together, club in front, pressure right foot, throw it back. As I'm throwing it back, I'm pushing forward. I'm landing before I start my downswing. Now I've got force in the ground to start my downswing, and I can come all the way around to a full finish. I'm telling you, if you do these every day, it's really, really going to, even if you do it for 5-10 minutes, it's really, really going to help with the proper sequencing in your swing. So that'd be kind of like phase one would be practice swings doing that, exactly that, right? Phase two would be doing practice swings where now I'm going to have my feet in a normal stance width, and I'm going to get that same sensation, but without stepping, right? The step forces you to get your momentum going forward. It forces you to get that pressure into the ground with your lead foot. Now you can still mess it up. You can still, I can still start my downswing before I get there. So that's what's key with the step drill is make sure that you're getting pressure into that lead foot before you start the motion of the downswing, right? So again, I'm going to start with my feet normal stance now. And again, I'm not hitting balls yet. I'm just starting with normal stance. Now I'm just focusing on pressure, trail side, throw it back. As I'm throwing it back, I'm moving forward, pressure lead side, then I throw it through. I'm telling you, you do practice swings that way. Maybe start out with some step drills, then work into some practice swings like this. It'll make a big difference in your sequencing, and overall your movement will get a lot better, right? Once I start getting that down, then I'm going to add the golf ball and start doing it with the golf ball. But that's kind of like phase one would be the step drill. Phase two would be doing normal stance practice swings where you're trying to incorporate the same sequencing that you had in the step drill. And then phase three would be adding the golf ball and doing it with the golf ball there. All right, so since we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. We'll be back here Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Everybody have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next time.